All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our masterclass webinar. My name is Chago, as you can see right underneath my screen, but I'll also write it down in the comments. And I am one of the teachers from one of the Milan, and I will be joined by one of my coworkers, Lisa, who is going to be she's just joining us right now. You'll see her in just a few minutes, and we'll be leading this session and talking about bilingualism today.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Nice to see you all. I'm Lisa. I'm also based in Myes Milano Maravili.
Great, fantastic. So today we'll be talking about bilingualism and learning languages in general and trying to keep all those languages in your head. So so let's get started. I guess since a lot of people are joining us from other schools, maybe we can do some brief introductions. As I said, my name is Thiago. I am originally from Brazil. But I partly grew up in the States, in California specifically. So I do have some experience with trying to manage different languages. And that's it.
Yeah, and I'm Lisa. So I'm from Ireland originally. So I've been in Italy for 2.5 years. But also, I guess, in a different way, similar to Thiago, in Ireland, we have 2 languages. So we grew up obviously speaking English and learning Irish. So a little bit of experience with bilingualism when I was growing up. So guys.
Exactly, fantastic.
If you want to write to us and tell us your name, what school you're from, please write to us in the comments. If you're logged in, you can send us a comment.
Exactly. And let us know if you also speak any other languages. So let us know what languages we have here in this lesson. All right. So as we said before, we will be discussing the idea of bilingualism, also raising a bilingual child, which can be, there are some challenges related to doing that, and the idea of whether by blessing or a curse. And this is a cool expression that you can use in English as well. So if it's a positive thing or a negative thing, a blessing or a curse. So here we have a few questions just to start thinking about it. So do you know anyone who is bilingual, maybe yourself or somebody else, in which languages, and what are their circumstances? Also, what is the strangest mix of languages and cultures that you have encountered? See, in my case, I speak different languages, but most of them are Romance languages. So Portuguese, Spanish, Italian. So they're not too difficult. Once you learn one of them, the other ones come by pretty easily. But some people speak very different languages, and so that can be quite different. So do let us know if you know anyone who is bilingual and what languages they speak. What about you, Lisa? Do you know many bilinguals or polyglots?
So it's quite funny in Ireland because there isn't much of a focus on being bilingual with other languages. But there is a lot more focus because of the history, the culture, to be bilingual with Irish and English.
And so how does it work in terms of day-to-day life? Since English and Irish, is Irish spoken more at home with older people? How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Well, in Ireland, there are certain areas that are called the Gaeltacht areas. So basically, because of that, in those areas, they speak mainly Irish. And then the rest, other people, they speak in English most of the time, but then sometimes in Irish, depending on the situation. It's not as common anymore, but in those Gaeltacht areas, they are naturally bilingual, will speak both languages.
Ah, cool. And how do you learn it? Is it something that is done in school, or is it the parents that basically teach you that?
It really depends because most people you learn in school, but depending on how traditional your family is, they will then maybe practice speaking Irish and English at home. So we had, I remember, people who were from maybe families that spoke Irish a lot at home, so they were really good at Irish.
Ah, I see. So I guess in a certain way, it's kind of similar to how dialects work in certain parts of Italy, for example.
Yeah, exactly, a little bit like that. But the problem is obviously with Irish, once you leave Ireland, you can't use it.
Can't use it at all. Yeah, of course, of course.
Whereas it's
Yeah,
very, very
great. Now, in
different.
my yeah. Well, for me, so I was, I was born speaking Portuguese because I come from Brazil originally, and then I, learned English once I moved to the but it was, an interesting mix because at home I would speak Portuguese, and then on the street I would speak English, and so it was this constant kind of switching as well for me. But obviously, in my case, I can actually speak all these languages in other places, even if I'm not in the country
Uh, but
itself.
did you find that growing up that was difficult or confusing, or for you was it just it was natural because it was just what you were used to?
Well, there were some difficulties. Obviously, people talk a lot about how it's so much easier for kids to learn languages. And, in many ways, that's true because you don't have as much of the inhibition. You're not afraid to make mistakes as much. But at the same time, I remember, when I first moved there, going to school was pretty tough because kids can be ruthless when you don't really speak the language. So to me, that was actually the biggest challenge.
Hmm.
Again, learning it from an early age really helped because I was able to learn it very quickly. But it was more of just the kind of the stigma, a little bit of just
Mm.
not speaking the language at first was the most difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of being seen, I
And I
would
would
imagine
say
being seen as different.
exactly, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and one of the challenges that I find nowadays is actually there. Sometimes you will completely forget a word in one language and you just know it in the other language. But if the person you're talking to doesn't speak that language, then it gets pretty tricky.
Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, like I find that even with my Italian, and sometimes I'm directly translating from Italian into English and not saying what is most natural to me because I'm listening to Italian all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes even there are like those trigger words. Like once you say that one word in that language, everything that comes out after that is in that. So yeah, and I think that's a good point. If you guys look at question number 3, it also asks the difference between speaking a second language and bilingual. And I would say that, yeah, that's the biggest difference. When you speak a second language, like you know it, you might know it quite well, you might even be fluent in that language, but there might still be some translation happening.
Mm.
And that's definitely the case with me for some languages. For example, I wouldn't consider myself completely natural in Spanish. Italian, it really depends sometimes. Whereas if you're completely bilingual, I feel like you're just comfortable. You can really think in that language, you dream in that language. So I
Yeah,
would say for me, that's it for English and Portuguese.
yeah, it's true. Eliza has written to us. Welcome, Eliza. So this is her answer here about this. So you can take a look. Okay, so I know many people who are English Italian speakers, some American Italian, some Brit Italian, and also Mexican Italian. Okay, but they all live here and they feel Italian. Okay, really nice.
Great.
Oh, and also a friend who's half Ecuadorian and she speaks Spanish and Italian. Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
a wide mix of people.
Absolutely. And I will say as well that although there is an advantage when you have languages that are quite similar, for example, as Elisa said, Spanish and Italian, they do have a lot in common. So it can help in learning the language But at the same time, I find that when they are too similar, they also can confuse you more sometimes. And it's faster to forget the other one. For instance, when I started learning Italian, my Spanish was gone. Even though I learned it quite well in high school, it's just way too similar that you end up. When I try to speak Spanish now, it's just a lot of Italian words that come out.
Yeah, being
Uh,
dependent.
it's not true for other languages that are more distant. And all right, we already talked a little bit about the age aspect of it, so let's move on here. So here we have a question which says, "What are the main dangers of raising a bilingual child?" So, what do you guys think? Do you think what are some precautions parents should take when raising a child bilingual? Also, because you might have parents who come from two different countries, and so that's obviously they would want their child to speak both languages to be kind of part of cultures. But what do you guys think? Are there any dangers or precautions that parents should take?
Yeah, guys. So there's a little bit of a delay on the chat. The answer's coming through. So don't worry, but share with us your opinions on these questions. Okay. So what you think, as Thiago said. Yeah, like I think you said, Thiago, like the stigma. I think the stigma sometimes of like children who speak different languages, maybe people not looking at it the same way, or people being skeptical.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that is common in kids that are raised bilingual is that there's often a delay in speaking compared to kids who are raised with one language, because there might be a little bit of confusion at first because they're hearing different, things since they're born, and so on average, they take a few more months to start speaking compared to speakers of one language.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think it can happen. And I used to work actually, when I first moved over, I was teaching and I was au pairing. So I was helping a family with two little boys. They are trying to raise the kids bilingual or semi-bilingual, depending on how successful. But yeah, they could see it sometimes that the kids would spend a lot of time with me, and then they might forget how to say something in Italian and be saying it just in English. But I guess that's part of the process, I would imagine. Okay, so Marco says, I think it's a great and rare opportunity. Okay, yeah, really good. Yeah. And Paula doesn't see the dangers. Elisa says, but a bilingual baby has more opportunities in life and he has a more active brain and is open-minded. Okay, yeah, really true. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think especially, yeah, the idea of having more opportunities. I mean, obviously this depends a lot on the language as well. They tend to be more used and perhaps useful than others. But I definitely agree with it. And I think the open-mindedness that Elisa mentions is also quite interesting, which before we mentioned a blessing and a curse, and I think this is a perfect example of this. There's also in English we have the expression kind of culture kid, as we say today. And that's the idea of kids who are raised in two different cultures, would have their own culture. So this third culture that forms, and while it can be great because make you more open-minded, as Elisa said, it can also be difficult sometimes to relate to people. Obviously depends on where you live, but some places they can still be quite traditional. Like national pride is still a big thing, and so it can be. Sometimes you might feel a little bit left out or stigmatized because of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it kind of creates a point of difference, I guess, with children as opposed to others. And Elisa said there, so it's always successful Okay, only if the two languages are really well spoken. Okay. So in this case, we would probably say it's only successful. It's only successful. It's only successful if the two languages are spoken well by the parents.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then comment for us says they might find it difficult to properly write in both languages for grammar, and phonetics might differ widely. That's very true as well. Um, it really depends on how you learn that language. If parents are only talking to you, you might know how to speak it, but not necessarily write. You might not have an in-depth knowledge of the language. I would say that is definitely true for me with Portuguese. See, I feel very comfortable speaking Portuguese for like everyday things, but see if I'm trying to make a point, if I'm trying to have a discussion, if I'm trying to talk about politics, I find that quite difficult. One is sometimes I do lack the vocabulary for it, but also the grammar rules tend to be more complex. I've actually my grammar in Portuguese got much better once I learned Italian, because I was able to study Italian very, in depth. And so the same rules they do kind of apply across the Romance languages. So that was helpful.
Okay, yeah, and yeah, I can imagine it's you need some sort of like some motivation or experience with speaking about all the different topics to be able to remember absolutely everything is quite impossible depending on where you're living. Elisa says, but once they've had a passage from a language to the other, there will be no more grammar problems. So yeah, exactly what you were saying there, Thiago, about finding some sort of link between the grammar, as you said, with Italian. And
Hmm.
Marco says parents should choose one language to speak to. The mother, for example, English, the father, French, to not create confusion. Yeah, I've read about this too. Kind of, what was your experience with this, Chago, or have you dealt with this before?
Well, not personally, not so much in that way. For me, it was more of like, when I was outside the house, it was English, and inside the house was Portuguese. So I didn't, plus I was already at 5 when I started this whole process. It would be interesting to see what it would be like for a baby. So really to grow up entirely with two different languages from birth. um, but I know that what sometimes can happen as well is that when parents try to raise kids bilingual, the child might actually reject one of the languages. Again, it goes back to the idea of the stigma from before, is that they might only want to speak the language that their peers are speaking. So when they go to school, all the other kids are speaking the language of that country. So they might feel like they don't want to learn that other language. They might not appreciate the you know
Yeah,
the cultural part of their parents, and the fact that it is important for their parents that they are connected to that culture. So I think as you get older, it's something that you
yeah,
appreciate more. I
yeah.
remember growing up, it was definitely, for me, it was like, oh gosh, like, why do I have to speak Portuguese?
Uh,
Um,
but now you probably appreciate it a lot more. um, yeah, like I think as well, sometimes, and I know this is like a general rule of having one parent speak one language and the other parent speak another. But unfortunately, in a home situation, it can actually be quite difficult to do that consistently with children. So that's why I know sometimes, for example, families have au pairs or someone like this who is an other person who demonstrates and specifically practices that language with the kids because they know, okay, with Lisa, I speak English, with mom and dad, I speak Italian or whatever. Because, yeah, unfortunately, that bond between child and parent makes, I think, it a bit difficult sometimes to have two languages between two parents. But it depends. It obviously depends on the family.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, guys, great. Now, so we do have an article that we're going to read. That way, we can also maybe learn some new pieces of vocabulary. So Lisa will be sharing with you a link. that you can, it's a very short link, so it should be easy. Just go to your browser and type that link in, and you'll be able to download this PDF. Okay, and we'll give you about 5 minutes or so for you to read it. So let's say that at 1:30, we'll check. So read, of course, for the information, but also let's try to find some synonyms in the text for these expressions on the screen as well.
Okay, so hopefully you should be able to copy that link to access the document.
Exactly. And then at 1:30, we will check the answers and see if you're able to find the expressions.
Okay. And yeah, so Paula just said there, it's very true that the language is very much relationship related. One tends to learn and remember what is connected to a relevant interaction. Exactly. And that's why for parents, it can be difficult to be very strict about that because also they need to interact with each other. So how are they at home if they're sitting having dinner with their kids? Is one of them going to answer questions, let's say, for example, in French, while one answers in English, or that
Sure.
dynamic is quite difficult.
Yeah, and you might even have a situation in which you have three languages happening. I think with English, this is very common. A lot of English-speaking countries, they do have a large number of immigrants, and so you might have two parents from distinct countries, but then the neutral language is also English.
Mm-hmm.
The parents might not speak the other parents' language either, and so it really can become quite confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So guys, I just want to make sure to check that that link is working for you and that it's going okay. Just let us know if you're getting access to that document, or if you have any problems, please let us know.
Exactly. Yeah, this should be the document, by the way. So if anyone is having any difficulty, you can also just check our screen. I'll slowly move through this. Okay,
Brilliant.
great.
Okay, great. That's great. Thanks for confirming, guys. I'll take it off the screen now.
And of course, guys, if you do come across any piece of vocabulary you're unsure of, do write it in the comment, and we're happy to explain it. All right, guys. So hopefully you're done with the article. But one thing we will do before we check the vocab is that maybe Lisa and I we can alternate also kind of reading the different points. So that way, if you're unsure of any word, maybe you want to see how it's pronounced. That way we can read them to you. Okay. So all right, I can do the first one. So all right, so we're talking about 12 things parents raising bilingual children need to know. The first thing they should know is that it doesn't happen by magic. Children do not become bilingual by magic. There is a persistent myth claiming that children are like sponges when it comes to languages, and that they will learn all languages they hear regularly. This is simply not true. Yes, in the right circumstances, children will naturally grow up to acquire the family languages, but this cannot be taken for granted.
Okay, and I'll read the next one. So, you need a plan. So, to be in with the best chance of succeeding in bringing up bilingual children, you need to plan ahead. How fluent do you want your children to be? What about reading and writing? Who speaks what and when? Discuss this in the family and agree on the goals.
Great. Also, consistency is crucial. Once you have your plan, you need to commit to it as a family and stay consistent in your language use. Yes, children can certainly become bilingual if parents mix the language with them, but the risk that they will at some point prefer to stick to the majority language is far greater if they have become used to the minority language, parents easily switching to the majority language.
And then you will have to pay attention to exposure times. So once you have your plan, you need to look into how much exposure that your children get to each language. There is a general recommendation. There is, however, no scientific proof for this, that children should be exposed to a language at least 30% of their waking time to naturally become bilingual. This should, however, only be taken as a guidance, depending on the type of exposure. Children might need more or less time to acquire a language.
Exactly. And also, parents will have to invest some extra time and sometimes maybe a bit of money as well. As you will need to find the time to talk a lot, to do the reading, and to find resources to help your children learn the language. You might find that you need to use your holidays to make a trip to boost your children's motivation to speak the language. Doesn't sound half bad.
It's a good excuse. And then there will be doubters. So, not everyone will agree with you that it is a good idea to raise your children and to speak all family languages. There will be those who tell you that there is no point, that it is not going to work. Others will think that you are expecting too much of your children, and some will say that you are confusing your children with all these languages. Ignore these doubters, but also forgive them as they don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly. Number seven, don't listen to bad advice. There might be times when a professional tells you to stop speaking a certain language to your children. If in doubt with regards to your child's language development, speak to a specialist who is experienced in dealing with bilingual children.
And then it's not always easy, of course not. There will be all sorts of challenges along your family's multilingual journey. Apart from the doubters and the ill informed experts, there will be more mundane obstacles. Will you be able to stick to your plan when life happens and offers its surprises in form of changed family circumstances, moves, career progressions, influence from others, and so on? When it feels difficult, ask for advice and help.
Exactly. Your child might answer you in the wrong language. This one usually hits the minority language parent. You feel that you have done everything right and stayed consistent, and still your darling comes home from school one day and no longer answers you in your language. You will feel disappointed and disheartened if this happens, but it is crucial that you don't give up at this point and that you continue to stay consistent and, if possible, also increase the exposure time.
Your children will gain an array of benefits by becoming bilingual. If you are still in doubt about whether to bring up your children to become bilinguals or not, read about all the great benefits your children will gain if you decide not to do it. We all want what is best for our children, so why wouldn't you support yours to have a wonderful gift of speaking more than one language?
That's right. And you will never regret it. I can assure you, you will not regret your decision to stick with it and make sure that your children go up to speak all the family languages. On the other hand, I have heard several parents who are sad that they gave up on passing on their languages. not to mention the many adults expressing their disappointment that they were not taught a language their mother or father knew when they were small. Yeah, this is definitely very true. It's the reason why I wanted to learn Italian, for example, is because, having kind of Italian ancestors, it's something that I wish growing up that I had a little bit of, and that's why I decided to study it eventually.
Yeah, because it creates a stronger bond or a stronger link between you and your family or extended family. And then the last, you will be proud. You will be immensely proud when your children, for the first time, speak to their grandparents or other relatives in their language. I can assure you that the feeling is absolutely wonderful. Not only will you be proud, so will your children and the rest of your family. You will also be a great role model to other families. Okay, so yeah, of course, you can inspire others.
Wonderful. So again, guys, if there's any vocabulary that you're unsure of, go ahead and let us know in the comments. So now we can focus on these expressions from the text. We do have a couple comments.
Yeah, so Elisa says make the first alternative, or maybe the first alternative is that it doesn't happen by magic. Okay. In this sense, the first alternative, persistent myth. So would we say persistent myth is that it doesn't happen by magic?
Persistent myth. Yeah, I mean that in a certain way that could. There is also a more direct one in the text. Show you guys, which is an ongoing fallacy, which should be. Wait, yeah, the persistent myth is the one that we said here. So maybe the ones on the slides, were they directly from the text? I thought it was the other way around.
It's actually not clear.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so let's go back to the slides, and we can just kind of talk about different ways to express this. Then, and there's a question.
Okay, so yeah, so Elisa says there will be doubters. Not everyone will agree with you. Okay, yeah, not everyone will agree with you. There will be doubters. It's equivalent. I think there is a huge gap between being exposed to a language and the actual ability to produce that language. Yeah, definitely. I think that is true. Yeah, there is being exposed to a language doesn't necessarily mean that you can use it. You need some help or some guidance in terms of that. Okay.
Yeah, and because that's the thing with languages as well. It's really easy for you to just forget it if you don't practice enough. I think if you grow up with it, maybe that's a bit more difficult, but your confidence in that language can certainly decrease if you don't use it so much.
Yeah, and that is true. Obviously, Elisa, what you're saying there, being bilingual is definitely different to having a second language. Like I wouldn't necessarily say about Irish people. Like Irish people, most of them, Irish is their second language because they don't speak Irish bilingually. But then there are some people who do. So yeah, there is a big difference, obviously. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So the alternative ways to.
All right. Well, yeah, to say these. Yeah. So, as you said, a persistent myth. We could say it's an ongoing fallacy. So, an idea that is not really based on evidence. It's incorrect. That's one way we can express that. There is a general recommendation that we can. It's usually advised. That also works.
Sorry, I tried to put in the ongoing fallacy into the vocabulary for the thing, and YouTube rejected my comment. Sorry.
Oh.
Apparently, my comment is a myth. Okay, I'll try again, but apparently I'm spamming the. There we go. Okay.
Now it went. Okay.
Yeah, apparently my comments are spam.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, I thought it was like fallacy. They were just interpreting that the wrong way. Um, all right. Then we have to boost your child's motivation. Of course, to boost motivation, we can simply say to encourage, right? To encourage your child. That certainly works. Um, to agree on the goals, can decide on the objectives together is one possibility. Uh, mundane obstacles. So I don't know if you guys know the word mundane. I believe it also exists in Italian, but something that is irrelevant. So irrelevant problems, irrelevant setbacks, those are mundane obstacles. And to ignore these doubters, it's so don't listen to the negativity, or good expression, don't listen to any naysayer.
Mm,
That's a nice expression. Someone who
exactly.
is very skeptical, they always doubt everything. You can say they're a naysayer.
Ignore the naysayers. Am I right there in how I spell that, or is it with an E?
Yes, no, that's correct. Yeah,
Just double
yeah,
checking.
funny expression. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
something you tend to hear more than you see written.
yeah.
Um, okay, and so just to finish up, guys, we have about 7 minutes left before we conclude for today. Uh, it would be great if you could, or individually, obviously, Harris, if you could summarize the article using 3 or 4 sentences to get the main points across. So, of course, communicating everything that the article said. But if you consider the tips that were given to parents in 3 or 4 sentences, how would you summarize most of the information? So we can have all three of you. You can each do this. We'll just wait, and then we'll look at the comments. And if there are any corrections, we can also help you with that.
And obviously, guys, if you have any questions or something that's not clear, please let us know. But obviously, as you're masterclass students, you have less questions than most.
All right, yeah, so we have some comments here. So Paula, who said, for children to become bilingual, parents need to be persistent. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that the article said, is to not get discouraged. It is normal for, the article mentioned towards the end, a child might be happy to kind of speak that language at first, but then once they join school and they're with their peers, first. So it is important for parents to stay persistent and not get discouraged by that. Marco mentioned that to plan ahead, yeah, and to have clear goals, to stay consistent in your language use, absolutely, and you have to invest some extra time, exactly, a lot of extra time, and maybe a little bit of money, especially if the parent doesn't have the time to teach it him or herself. And then Paula also said that for children to become bilingual, parents should persist in exposing them to the two languages in every form, spoken, written, and to persevere, even if the results appear confusing. Absolutely. And one thing the article said, which is quite nice, is also, of course, to plan trips, to places where that language is spoken, whether it's the parent's home country or other places, as obviously then it gives a more practical sort of element to learning that language. Doesn't feel like you're just doing that for your parents, but then you can really connect with your family, your relatives, and of course, the language also comes with a lot of culture, so it's not just words, but there's a lot that can be learned when you learn a new language as well. So, all right, guys, we are reaching the end of our webinar. But if you do have any questions still related to anything, vocabulary, any general curiosity, or anything, please do let us know.
Yeah, I also have to agree. I realized from my own experience when I was an au pair, that thing of the naysayers, yeah, it can actually be quite difficult for families because, for example, I remember one of the grandparents didn't speak any English. So she got quite frustrated when the kids were speaking English because she couldn't understand her grandchildren. And like sometimes there is this I guess block or it's kind of I guess something that people have to face up to and just to confront if they're dealing with someone who disagrees or gets frustrated by the children speaking a different language. So yeah, it's I guess can be challenging in some families.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as the article said before, also, a lot of exposure is absolutely crucial, as Paula also mentioned. From personal experience, I have had parents who kind of got in touch with me to kind of do lessons with their kids, for 1 or 2 hours a week, expecting the kid to then become bilingual or to learn English as a second language. And that, unfortunately, just isn't realistic. See, in the case
Exactly.
of an au pair, that's a lot more helpful. You have someone who's constantly
Yeah.
in the house, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes people can have unrealistic expectations of how easy it will be. Okay.
Yeah, so Marco had a question. So to expect, it's followed by of, to expect, no, to expect something from someone. Or I guess, well, of could,
Yeah. Yeah, you
I
can have
think if of can actually work as well, yeah.
yeah, you can expect something from someone or something of someone. It's like what do you
Of someone,
expect?
yeah, they both work.
Yeah, you can say both. Yeah, your expectations of something or your expectations from something.
Okay. All right, guys. So we are going to conclude our masterclass webinar here. Thank you all for joining, for participating, for asking good questions. Hopefully this was useful and interesting. So really, thank you.
Yeah, and guys, remember that every day, 1 o'clock this week, we have masterclass webinars. So if you have time, tune in again. It will be a different conversation, just if you want to listen or participate. you're obviously more than welcome.
Okay. Thank you guys and have a nice week.
Have a great week. Thank you so
Bye
much.
bye.
Bye.